They called it the house on Willow Lane, a crumbling Victorian that had sat abandoned for over 30 years. In 1989, the Palmer family disappeared from the house without a trace, leaving behind everything they owned as if they had just vanished into thin air. The house became a local legend. Teenagers dared each other to go inside, but no one stayed for long. Something about the air in that house felt wrong. I had heard all the stories growing up, but it wasn't until I inherited my uncle's old detective files that I took a real interest in the case. My uncle, now retired, had been one of the first officers to investigate the Palmer family's disappearance, and it had haunted him for decades. The case had consumed him. Even after the official investigation ended, my uncle had continued digging, chasing leads that always seemed to lead to dead ends. His obsession with the case drove him to an early retirement, and eventually he became a recluse, barely speaking about anything except his theories on what had happened to the Palmers. When he passed away last year, I found the files tucked away in a box in his attic. There were notes, newspaper clippings, photos, and interviews he'd conducted with neighbors, local kids, and anyone who had ever had anything to do with the house. One thing stood out to me immediately. In all the time that had passed, no one had ever found a single trace of the Palmers. No bodies, no footprints, nothing. What was even stranger was the state in which the house had been left. According to my uncle's notes, it was as though the family had simply walked out in the middle of their day. The kitchen table had been set for dinner, the children's toys were scattered across the living room, and a pile of laundry still sat unfolded on the couch. Nothing about the scene suggested foul play, and yet the family had vanished without a single clue. Intrigued, I decided to visit the house myself. I had driven past it many times over the years, but I had never set foot inside. Now, armed with my uncle's files, I wanted to see if there was anything I could discover that had been missed. The house was still as I remembered it, dilapidated and overgrown with ivy, its windows boarded up, but the front door slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, glancing around the empty street. There was no one around, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the property. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew hit me immediately. Everything was, as my uncle had described, frozen in time. The furniture, the dishes, the toys, it was all still there, untouched for 3 decades. The living room was eerily quiet, and I could almost imagine the family sitting there, unaware that they were about to disappear forever. As I made my way through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was a strange sensation, like the house itself was aware of me, its long abandoned halls now alert to my presence. I stopped in front of the dining room, and that's when I saw it. Something that hadn't been in the police reports or my uncle's files. Scrawled across the wall, in what looked like red paint, was a message. We never left. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who had written this? Was it a prank? Or had someone been in the house after all these years? The paint looked old, dried and cracked, but I couldn't tell how long it had been there. I took a step back, the air suddenly feeling heavier, more oppressive. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, knowing I would need to show this to someone later. But as I stood there staring at the message, I heard it. A creak from upstairs, my breath caught in my throat. The house had been abandoned for decades. There shouldn't have been anyone here. Slowly, I turned toward the staircase, my mind racing. Was someone squatting here? Or worse, had the person who wrote that message come back? The creaking continued, rhythmic, like footsteps. Someone or something was moving upstairs. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to investigate. Every step I took toward the staircase felt like a mistake, but curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was going on in this house, even if part of me was screaming to leave. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, each creak echoing through the silent house. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the fading sunlight seeping through the cracks in the boarded windows. The sound was coming from one of the bedrooms at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, a faint light flickering beneath it. The door at the end of the hallway creaked open slightly as I approached, and the flickering light beneath it cast long shadows across the floor. My heart raced, and I could feel the cold air brushing against my skin as I stood just inches away from the threshold. Whoever, or whatever, was behind that door was waiting for me. I pushed the door open gently and found myself staring into a room frozen in time. It was clearly a child's bedroom, with faded wallpaper featuring cartoon animals, toys scattered across the floor, and a small twin bed in the corner. The light I'd seen flickering was coming from an old flashlight lying on the floor in the center of the room. It was dim, its batteries clearly dying, but the sight of it still sent chills down my spine. Who had been in here? I stepped inside cautiously, my phone's flashlight guiding my steps as I scanned the room. The air felt even colder than before, like the room was holding on to the past in a way the rest of the house wasn't. As I walked toward the bed, something caught my eye, drawings, dozens of them taped to the walls. I moved closer and realized they were all crayon sketches, crude but clear enough to recognize what they were meant to depict. They all showed the same family, a mother, a father, and 2 children, standing outside the house on Willow Lane. But in each drawing, something was off. The faces of the family members were scratched out in red, and looming behind them in every drawing was a dark figure, shadowy and tall with no distinct features but an unmistakable presence. The figure stood just outside the frame of the family, as if watching them from a distance. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the drawings. This wasn't something the police had ever mentioned. These drawings weren't in any of the reports I'd read in my uncle's files. Had the children drawn these, and if so, why had they been left behind? As I reached up to touch one of the drawings, my phone's flashlight flickered, and the room suddenly plunged into darkness. I froze, my heart racing. The air grew even colder, and I felt that familiar sensation of being watched again, stronger this time. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. It was coming from somewhere in the room, but I couldn't make out the words. My phone's light flickered back to life for a moment, and I spun around, scanning the room, but no one was there. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispering stopped. I quickly made my way to the door, my hands shaking as I pulled it open and rushed down the hallway. I didn't stop until I reached the front door, bursting out of the house and into the cool evening air. My heart was still pounding as I turned to look back at the house. There, in the second-floor window, the same room I had just been in, stood a figure, watching me. My mind raced as I stood outside, staring at the window where the figure had been. It was gone now, but the image of it watching me was seared into my mind. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that the house was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I knew I couldn't leave this alone. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. Once inside, I locked the doors and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to figure out what was going on, but I couldn't do it alone. My first thought was to contact my uncle, but he was gone now. Instead, I called his old partner from the police department, Detective James Turner. He had worked on the Palmer case alongside my uncle and was one of the few people who had never fully accepted the official conclusion that the family had just disappeared without a trace. After explaining what I'd seen in the house, Turner agreed to meet me at a nearby diner. He arrived an hour later, looking older and more tired than I remembered. We sat in a booth, and I showed him the photos I'd taken of the message on the wall and the drawings in the bedroom. His face paled as he scrolled through the images. "I thought we'd seen everything in that house," he muttered, shaking his head. "But this is new. These drawings weren't there when we searched the house." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Then who put them there? The house has been abandoned for 30 years. No one's lived there since the Palmers disappeared." Turner rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe someone's been going back in. We never did figure out what happened to them, and that place has always felt off." He glanced at the window as if half expecting someone to be watching us even here. "There were rumors back when we first started the investigation," he said quietly. "Neighbors said they'd seen strange lights in the house at night. Others swore they'd heard voices coming from inside. We chalked it up to local superstition. After all, a house where a family just disappears? People are bound to talk." I shuddered, remembering the whispers I'd heard in the bedroom. "Do you think it's related? The lights, the voices? Could they have something to do with what happened to the Palmers?" Turner sighed. "I don't know, but the fact that you found those drawings and that message makes me think there's more to this than we thought. We never found any evidence of foul play, but something always felt wrong about that house, like it was hiding something." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in thought. Finally, Turner stood up. "I need to get back in there, see what else we might have missed. I'll pull some strings and get a warrant, but it'll take a day or two. In the meantime, stay away from that house. Whatever's going on, we don't know how dangerous it could be." Turner's warning hung heavy in the air, but I couldn't stay away. The house had its grip on me now, and I needed to understand what I'd seen. The next day, despite Turner's advice, I returned to Willow Lane. I parked a few blocks away and approached the house on foot, slipping through the overgrown hedges to avoid drawing attention. The front door was still slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. As I stepped inside, the familiar chill greeted me. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the house knew I'd returned. I made my way upstairs, back to the bedroom with the drawings. They were still there, but something was different. The drawings had changed. Where once the faces of the family had been scratched out, now they were whole, almost too perfect. The faces looked real. But the shadowy figure remained, looming larger than before, taking up more space on the walls, as if it were creeping closer. A noise behind me made me spin around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing in the doorway, was Turner. He looked disheveled, his clothes rumpled, and his face pale. "I told you to stay away," he said, his voice hoarse. I couldn't stop thinking about it either. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You scared the hell out of me." Turner walked into the room, his eyes scanning the walls. "I got the warrant, but I came in early. Something about this place, it's different, isn't it?" I nodded, watching as Turner's gaze settled on the drawings. He frowned. "These weren't here yesterday. Not like this." Before either of us could say anything else, a door down the hallway creaked open. Turner and I exchanged a glance, then cautiously made our way toward the noise. It was coming from the master bedroom, the one the Palmers had shared. The door, which had been closed the day before, was now slightly open. Turner pushed the door open with the back of his hand, and we stepped inside. The room was in better condition than the rest of the house, almost as if it had been preserved. The bed was made, the furniture untouched, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. But then we saw it, a small leather-bound journal lying open on the dresser. Turner picked it up, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the pages. "This is new." I leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably recent. The entries detailed the days leading up to the Palmer family's disappearance. It wasn't just a record, it was a warning. The final entry made my blood run cold. "We never left, we're still here." Suddenly the room grew colder and the lights flickered. The house groaned as if something ancient was stirring, something that had been waiting for us. Turner's face went pale. "We need to leave. Now."